I do remember buying this pint glass, or actually I should call this the stein, but I don't know how it got here. Did I bring it out and I not realize it? Or was some benevolent higher power supposed to be bringing it out to help me out and encourage me? Life is working in mysterious ways. So on that note, welcome to another edition of the Wandering Yuki Cheese Cafe. And as you're probably able to tell by the footage beforehand with me in a sweater, and especially now with this long sleeve shirt, we're getting into September now, and we're kind of getting to the end of summer. I am gonna miss being able to wear my tank tops, shorts, and not have to worry about wearing too many layers of clothing, but we do live in Montreal after all. Winter lasts for about a good 6 months minimum, and we're lucky to get whatever summer we can. But I can't say it has been a bad summer because I really took advantage of it too, especially finishing off this Summer Oldies edition that I want to do now. Yeah, it was a little interesting idea that came up around the time in June. What was it? Oh yeah, I remember. I was listening to some music and then the old song by the Lovin' Spoonful, Do You Believe in Magic, had come on, and it just made me think back to riding in the car with my dad when I was playing Oldies 990, and made me think back to my whole parents' generation of music. So it kind of became a running theme for this entire summer, especially given everything that did happen too. I thought it could be a nice little tribute as well. And of course, I was kind of wondering, how am I going to be ending my summer series? Well, I was just thinking to myself that as I'm recording this, it's going to be ahead of time, but when it drops, this is going to coincide around September 21st, which is not only the last official day of summer over here, but it also ties in pretty close to the 2-year anniversary since I started doing the YouTube channel. And it's pretty funny to think about that all this time, had you asked me years ago, I never would have seen myself as a YouTuber. And even then, they changed a lot over the year. In fact, I'm gonna put a link on the top right corner to episode 100 because that gives you a pretty good overview of how I started the channel and how it's evolved over time. But just to give you a rundown again, it all started with me doing vignettes of me being in Spain and Italy. Wait a minute. I know that riff. Huh. Street musicians around here. Yep, that is Shine On You Crazy Diamond by Pink Floyd. Eventually doing these other vignettes of myself around the house for cooking. Okay, we're just gonna close it up now. And that's a nice little birdie. Imagine that. Brown sugar, paprika, salt, pepper, a little bit of chili powder, and you got your basic dry rub for a beer can chicken. Doing some entertainment in order to keep busy and especially keep myself sane during the pandemic. And then it kind of morphed into a basic cooking show and then a whole lot of stuff to show off around home. But because I was kind of exploring Montreal for the last year again, I figured it would be a nice way to recap everything I've seen around the last summer, whether it be the bars, areas I've been around, just something to kind of tie it all together. Because I know that when I'm walking around, I'm talking about being in certain parts of town, like I mentioned Mile End, I mentioned Rosemount, and you probably think to yourself, like, what's the significance? Like, how do you know what each area is kind of like? And it felt like a good way to cap it all off. Because again, this is a summer of exploration for me. Re-exploring Montreal after I've slowly been making my way in during the pandemic after being away for so long. So we're gonna get going on this. And just a full disclosure too, I might throw some trivia in there about some of the district divisions, maybe some historical stuff, but this is not gonna be a full-blown history or social science or a political lesson. This is just me trying to use it as a backdrop for telling some stories again and how it relates to me. But let's start off with this. Smash that like button below, subscribe to the channel too, and if you have anything you want to share for your history or for the divisions, put that in the comments section and we'll try to go from there. But first, I kind of realized I need something to drink in here while I'm doing my storytelling. And I have an idea. I'm gonna go check those trees because I've been finding some beers lately in those. Lo and behold, there was a beer that's in there. I swear, I feel like I got beer growing from a tree now. That would make life a lot easier and then be able to ease up my budget for it. So what have I got today? I actually don't remember if I've highlighted this one before, but it's something that's called the Nelson Intergalactic New England IPA, and it's from La Barberie. When I think La Barberie, I think like a barber shop. But I know this brewer actually, and this was actually from the time I started drinking beer before I really knew my microbrewers. And I've been to this one before. It's located in Quebec City, basically the provincial capital of Quebec. And it was a pretty nice one. I recall being at the terrace, and I had tried out one pumpkin type of beer, which was all right. This had to be around October because, I feel like I'm butchering my words. This was around October of 2017. Yeah, I'd gone there like on a vacation for just like a day trip, because you go there for 3 hours. It takes 3 hours to get there, hang around, then you come back and it's like 3 hours later. So it's an easy trip to do. And it was a pretty cozy, quaint atmosphere I found. So I kind of tried out a few of them from time to time, but if there's a new New England IPA, I'm definitely going to give that one a shot. And as for why they call this one Nelson, oh, I had a feeling it had something to do with the hops. I'm still not as well versed in the hops, because they do have specific names in here, like there's Citra hops, there's El Dorado hops, there's this one here, Nelson Sauvin hops. I don't know, I figured that they called it Nelson because when you drink it, you're going to want to start laughing like you're Nelson Muntz from The Simpsons. Hey, that would be kind of funny, wouldn't it? My verdict? Yeah, that was pretty bad. Okay, it's a tasty one. So, let's get started on this. So, yeah, what I'm doing over here is I'm using a bit of rosemary, like 1 teaspoon worth. Rosemary is not one of those herbs that I use very often for myself, and I figured I wanted to do this for a new kind of steak that I'm doing for myself. One I've been kind of trying to hunt down for a little while I'm tying it all together with my storytelling here. So 1 teaspoon of this, and around 2 cloves of garlic are going to be put in. So I guess if you're wondering about areas of Montreal, well, I guess I'll give you another recap too. Technically, I live on the Montreal greater area, on the South Shore as they would call it. It's a bit more suburban than it is in the big city. While I've lived here all my life, and I find it pretty cozy and relaxing, I am drawn to the city most because there's a lot more life and a lot more activity over there. There's always something new to explore around there too. Like, I'm always going through the same streets I mentioned countless times, and I'm finding some kind of a new coffee shop, new bar to check out, maybe a restaurant, or heck, even just enjoying the architecture and everything else that comes along with it. So 1 and 2 tablespoons of olive oil should be enough. And I guess I could start talking about the one area that everyone will probably talk about when they think of Montreal is the downtown core, or even the historical center, because every major metropolitan city is going to have one. So downtown, if you're thinking of that, you're probably thinking of stuff like St. Catherine Street West, maybe Peel Street, Crescent Street. Those are the areas where most of the tourists are going to go. St. Catherine Street has a lot of businesses, a lot of office buildings, but also especially it's the major shopping district. Like, it's the main area that everyone will be hanging around. And I work downtown also. I don't do these videos for a living. I actually have another job that helps pay the bills, and especially pays for the wanderings. It is a lot of fun. As a kid, I mostly remember going downtown sometimes after school, back when I was finishing at 3 o'clock, and then my mom would say, let's go downtown to go visit our grandmother. Some of you may not be old enough to remember this, but the Eaton's department store was where my grandmother worked. She was a cafeteria worker over there, and would let us in, sometimes would visit, and then we might visit afterwards or head on home after taking the rush hour bus. So that was always one of the nice memories for me. But as time went on, I found other stuff to explore within the city too. Especially for me, one of my favorite areas was Crescent Street. When I started to enjoy going to a few bars with friends, that was always one of our hangouts. And especially because I have some friends that say they've been going to the Sir Winston Churchill pub or Winnie's as they say affectionately, for maybe a lot more years than I was around. End piece. Now I'm going to be getting onto my steak. So I was over at the Jean Talon market a little bit earlier today, as you saw, and I did find at a butcher a little cut that I've been trying to hunt down for a long time. It's called onglet. It's like a harvest steak or harvester steak, I think it is. And it's a bit similar to a bavette in the sense that it's around the abdominal area of the cow, except the bavette's going to be like the lower mid area of it. The onglet is going to be more the upper abdominal area of that too. And it's actually a little bit more thicker than the bavette that I was using for a while. It could be a bit pricey depending on who you're talking to, because for some people, steak is just pricey, period. But you know what? Even in the day and age of inflation going on, I'm not going to give up the food I enjoy. I'm still going to be doing it. Plus, it's better than doing all these pre-prepared things or processed foods. If I'm doing a steak and if I'm doing my own marinade, I know what kind of ingredients are going in there. Luckily, too, I'm taking my boning knife and I'm splitting this in half because my goal here is that I'm going to be able to have enough meals for 2 suppers this week. There. Just like so. And I'll keep this aside so that I'll be able to wash this up later on. Oh yeah, if you're wondering what the other sauce was, I put Worcestershire in there too, because I've heard that goes good with beef in general. Now, that's the downtown area, but downtown covers a lot of stuff. And in fact, technically that whole area of Montreal will be called the Ville-Marie, or City of Mary district, which covers the downtown area, things like Milton Park. And another part of that is Old Montreal and the Old Port. That is also a pretty big touristy area as well, because you got a lot of the old architecture from, I would say, around the time when Montreal was starting to be founded. And again, I'm not going to be going for historical accuracy here. I'm just going for storytelling. So you would have things like the Pointe-à-Calier Museum of Archaeology there. You'd have some traces of the Old Port within Old Montreal. You're walking along and you see those cobblestone roads that are there too. And other old architecture that's been preserved for almost a few centuries. Of course, in the grand scheme of things, Montreal's still pretty young. Because I've been to Europe for a few vacations, once to Spain, once to Italy. And knowing that some of those structures have been up for even longer, like even more hundreds of years or possibly thousands of years, like the Colosseum's been up for 2,000 years, so damn, that's a long time. It just goes to show that Montreal's still pretty young. But it's a fun area. It's very lively, very touristy. Areas you could check around the Old Port are Place Jacques-Cartier, which is a little ramp that goes south towards the old port, close to Notre Dame. You got some nice restaurants there like Nelson Garden. In fact, I am going to put a link on the top right corner because then you can visit the first episode of my Summer Wanders series this time, from this past year. And I ended up at Nelson Garden too for some good tartare. It's a great atmosphere, but it's also, you're going to love the LED lights along with the garden in there. With the live jazz quartet too, or the jazz trio. I love the vibe. There's that. There's Terrasse Bon Secours, which could be a little bit hectic at times. I love Brewski's Pub and Tap Room, and I've highlighted that one on the channel countless times too. I just love the vibe around there. Now I gotta wash my hands.
Do you believe in magic in a young girl's heart? How the music can free her whenever it starts, and it's magic. If the music is groovy and makes you feel happy like an old-time movie, I'll tell you about the magic and the free your soul. But it's like trying to tell a stranger about a rock and roll. Don't bother to choose if it's jug band music or rhythm and blues. Just go and listen. It'll start with a smile that won't wipe off your face, no matter how hard you try. Your feet start tapping and you can't seem to find how you got there. So just blow your mind.
I'll be honest that my experience with downtown when I was a kid was mostly the main shopping area around St. Catherine, but it was only like maybe around elementary school when I first got introduced to Old Montreal, when we did a field trip around Square Victoria, Pointe-à-Calier, and I think even around Place Dame, something like that. So that's kind of I was a late bloomer to discover that too. So I've got this all marinated, and I'm going to keep it aside so that it soaks up. The beef is going to soak up all the juices over here too. And I'm not going to start my grill for another hour or so, so I got plenty of time to let this thing stew. Now, I guess another good area that could be worth checking out one of these days is around the Place des Arts area, or as they call it in French, the Quartier du Spectacle, which translated into English is basically the concert district, because that's around where they have a lot of the big concerts there. Because if you go downtown in the summertime, you're going to be finding there's a lot of events that happen around there. The big ones are going to be the Francophonie, the French music festival that always happens in June to coincide with Saint Jean-Baptiste, which people call the Quebec national holiday. I'm trying to put together like how one goes for the other, but anyways, that's a discussion for another time. You're also going to have Just for Laughs that might happen around there too, biggest comedy festival around. But the big one too is going to be the Montreal International Jazz Festival. That one is actually pretty well renowned all around the world too. You can have some big artists that could be playing there, sometimes for paid concerts, sometimes for free concerts too. I might have recounted this story in the past, but I'll say it again. 2009, I believe that's when Stevie Wonder was opening the Jazz Festival that year, and he was actually doing a free concert for everybody to see. I had a work colleague that was able to see that back in the day, and from what she remembered, it was a pretty rainy day, but everyone was there, but everyone also had their umbrellas too, so it was almost like, you know, you're so close together, so packed together with everyone's umbrellas, you're pretty much shielded from the rain while you're watching the show. But that's not even the most insane part. You think, Stevie Wonder, an artist of that magnitude, doing a free show? I know, it's crazy, isn't it? But they kind of did that again this year for the closing concert. That one was held by the Roots. Yeah, the Roots. If you're into hip-hop, well, I know a bit of the Roots, but they're more like a jazz quartet with music backing, with some rapping happening around there too, so it's not like you're just sampling music like your Vanilla Ice. Actually, Vanilla Ice is the worst example. So you've got a few of those. And you might even have some of the big jazz artists of the day. I think B.B. King, blues guitarist, was playing there too. Dave Brubeck was also another one of those who was playing it very frequently. And in fact, he would make annual visits there while he was still around. Because he was one of those guys that he was still touring up into his 80s, and I have to think back, but did he live into his 90s? Yeah, he was in his 80s and still doing tours up to that day. It was kind of, it made me think of another interesting tidbit is I collected a few jazz albums years ago when I was getting some of the Jazz 101 records. So things like Miles Davis, Kind of Blue, Charles Mingus, Dave Brubeck, Take 5. But Dave Brubeck at that time where they were doing the remasters was probably one of the only ones from that time period. Oh, a bug. He was the only one from that time period who was still around to be able to contribute liner notes to his own reissues, which I thought was kind of neat to do. All this to say that Place des Arts is a great place to go check out music for the live jazz show, or in terms of other bars too, I probably talked about it before, but Benelux is a little bit north of it. If you like microbrewery stuff, it's highly recommended. So yeah, that's the downtown area that I know pretty well, but there's a couple of other districts I started to visit a lot more too. Like there's another one that you would know called Hochelaga Maisonneuve. To give you a bit of an idea what Hochelaga was all about, I think if I know my history correctly, Hochelaga was like an old Iroquois settlement that was around the southern part of Montreal. And it was actually around 1535 when Jacques Cartier and a bunch of French settlers had settled upon that part of the island, and I think that's where the name came from. Maisonneuve is kind of significant because I believe it comes from the name Paul Chomedy de Maisonneuve, who's essentially considered the founder of Montreal. So if you ever see that name and wonder why it's everywhere, that's the reason, because Maisonneuve is pretty big in the grand scheme of things for Montreal. Now, I don't really believe that I spent a lot of time around Maisonneuve, Hochelaga when I was a kid. I mean, I feel like I did spend some time actually close to the Olympic Stadium, the Botanical Gardens, the Insectarium, because those would be the areas where if you're a kid, you're in elementary school going on a field trip, you would head around there. The Olympic Stadium, I don't think I ever went swimming inside of it. But let's face it too, at that point, the roof is always breaking apart in that stadium that you never, if you go in there, if you're going to have an accident. How sturdy it is these days? Fuck if I know. So, other parts of Hochelaga are a bit more working class, I believe, at the time. Obviously, the vibe has changed a lot as they start to renovate and to get things a bit more redone. But there's a good brewer that I went to that's called L'Espace Public. They make it on the spot, but they also have it available in stores too.
what is and what is not. One dot, two dot, a pair of eyes, a voice, a touch, complete surprise. Two dot, growing up, looking for a place to live. 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 My goal's not to travel so far in the unknown. My goal's not to travel so deep into your space. Three dot, a trinity, a way to map the universe. Three dot, four dot is what will make a square a bed to build on. It's all four dot. My goal's not to travel so far in the unknown. My goal's not to travel so deep into your space.
One way you could kind of tell that a barbecue's been well used and well loved is you might get a little bit of corrosion or rust that's happening along the edge of it. I think I put this to good use for quite a while, but I'm not so concerned because it looks like it's all just cosmetic here. My main concern would be that if on the underside it really starts to deteriorate, then I know I'm gonna have to replace this. But I think I can let this last for another good 2 seasons or so. Anyways, while Hochlag was another part that I had kind of gotten used to in the past, like explored for some used game stores, a couple of restaurants, especially for brews in the recent times, that actually wasn't where I was going for most of the time around my wanders in Montreal. So, to give you an idea, if there was anything that was kind of close to a main street in the city, I would say it's probably St. Lawrence Boulevard, or as they say in French, Boulevard Saint-Laurent. So that's around the place where if there's any streets that pass through there, that's what divides the east and the west of Montreal normally. So, and if you also go north along that, then you actually cover a lot of the districts within especially the center of the city. So just downtown alone, you go to the southernmost point, and you're going to be already at the old port, through old Montreal, through part of downtown, Chinatown, and you cover quite a bit of ground with that too. But continue north along it, you're actually going to be able to see a lot of the other stuff. I kind of like being around there because I don't own a car, and when I want to explore, I like to walk around because I like to get my exercise and kind of work off my beers too. But that area too, it just goes to show that that part is very walkable, very accessible by foot, and also very well connected by public transport if that's your style. Driving around there could be a bit of a pain in the ass, and especially trying to find parking. Especially also with the amount of parking space that are being eliminated these days. Really? I'm surprised. We got some raindrops now. They only predicted like maybe 5 o'clock, but we're getting it pretty early. It's like I keep saying, predicting the weather is like trying to predict when a politician's telling the truth. So yeah, along Saint Laurent Boulevard, you'll be able to get a lot of the other districts around that are pretty interesting, at least for my taste. So I've already told you about the downtown area, but if you're to go, let's say, north of Pine Avenue, then you're going to get to the area that's known as the Plateau Montreal. Anyone who doesn't know what a plateau is, it's like basically level land that's like right here on the edge, or I don't know. You could probably look it up geographically if you want, but it's pretty much close to Mount Royal or Mont Royal, and that's pretty much a very artsy, hipster area. In terms of my childhood memories, we probably drove by there in the past when we were trying to visit the cemetery, back before I even knew what a cemetery was. And I might have already covered this, so you can always click on the link on the top right corner to do my return to Mount Royal back in July. But I did visit from time to time to walk around. There's some pretty good record stores there, like Frisson Rock, which specializes in metal and progressive rock. Old 33 Tours is alright too. They're like one of the first big record stores. What am I saying? They're one of the first independent ones to really take advantage of the vinyl boom around, and they've actually done the best, or at least have done pretty well. Obviously, they're focusing a lot more on the new pressings compared to the older pressings that I would used to collect. So the price has gone up a little bit now, which means collecting physical media, especially collecting vinyl, is definitely like an expensive hobby these days. And in terms of bars and restaurants, I used to pass by a few of those around back then. Some look like they're very quaint, cozy with picnic tables, but I'd yet to think about going to grab a drink over there. It's really only been this past year that I've really started to visit that from time to time. So in terms of good spots, I can recommend to you Taverne Les Torchers. They're a pretty quaint, cozy one too, with a nice woody, rustic vibe on the interior. There's also another one that's worth checking called Les Enfants de Rock, or Les Enfants du Rock. You'll know when you get to there because on the facade outside, you're going to see all these logos of classic rock bands. You're going to see the portrait of David Bowie like he's on the Aladdin Sane cover. Like, when you see that, you know it. And it's, again, microbrews on tap. I did get a pint of Pretty Bastard Stout over there just because of the name. I don't usually go for stouts, but I just loved the name of it. I thought, why not? Mount Royal Avenue is probably the best well-known street around there, but you've got to actually find a lot of stuff because it covers a lot of ground. Obviously, there's going to be La Fontaine Park, probably one of the larger parks in Montreal, where they have a nice little lake, river, fountains. A lot of people go for a tan, and it covers a lot of ground too. You're also going to find Duluth Avenue that I had actually visited during my vacation in August. And in fact, I'll put a link on the top right corner for that one too, because I put that one together that day, and then when I compiled, I thought, this is great. Good choice of music, good jokes, good everything. It was a lot of fun to put together. And depending on who you ask, some people will call the Plateau Montréal New Paris, or like Little Paris or Little France, because apparently there's a lot of people where they move from France and then end up around the plateau. I don't know if it could compete with Little Italy or Little Portugal or there's others, but it's a fun fact there. And if you're going to be talking about the plateau, then it would not be appropriate to talk about it without mentioning Mount Royal, which is more towards the west side of the city, or of the district. I've walked along there before, and one thing I was kind of surprised to learn about over the years is that it was actually an old volcano that had become deactivated, like it stopped being active a long time ago. Like people did studies say it was probably at least thousands of years ago, if not more. I don't know. I'm not a geologist, so I'm not an expert on that. It's great. We used to visit the cemetery there, like I said before, knowing what a cemetery is. And I also remember going with my grandmother up onto Beaver Lake. It's a little man-made artificial lake that they have there, which is pretty nice. I mean, considering it's the Isle of Montreal, it's very urban. Having any kind of lake on the island is a good thing. I dig it.
Season cycle moving round and round, pushing life up from a cold dead ground. It's growing green. It's growing green. Well, darling, don't you ever stop to wonder about the clouds, about the hail and thunder, about the baby and its umbilical, who's pushing the pedals on the season cycle. Summer chased by autumn chased by winter. Season cycle go from death to life, bring a harvest or a man his wife. It's growing green. Well, darling, don't you ever sit and ponder about the building of the hills yonder, where we're going in this verdant spiral, who's pushing the pedals on the season cycle.
Now, if you're to go a little bit north of Montreal Avenue, eventually get to the other part of Montreal that's called Mile End. I don't recall exactly what the difference is between the Plateau and Mile End, but they're all part of the same borough from what I've heard over the years. So it is a little bit of a similar vibe in terms of the arts, the cafes, the bars, the restos, the cute little spots. My main point of reference when I was growing up was mostly when I was going there for bagels, because I already heard from my mom a lot of times about Saint Viateur, Fairmount, like those are the big bagel manufacturers in Montreal, and they are pretty well renowned because you go to ask anyone about Montreal style bagels, they're probably going to come specifically for that. Almost like when you want a Montreal style smoked meat sandwich, you would probably go to Schwartz's Deli, if you can get there too, because even when I was doing a walk, and I remember walking yesterday, it was one of those places that you're always going to get a lineup of people waiting to go get it. And sometimes it's like a block to a block and a half of people waiting in line to go get their smoked meats. It's unique, but it could be a little bit expensive and it takes a lot of time to get to it. And also you got to order all your stuff separately too. So keep that in mind if ever you want to visit that. But Schwartz's is in the Plateau. I'm talking about Mile End. The bagel places are pretty nice to get them like fresh out of the oven and then being able to eat them right on the spot. But I will say that you always have to have cash on you, mostly because they don't have debit or credit, which I understand, especially in the day of COVID where everybody's going electronic now. If it seems to reduce their expenses, then I guess it helps out. And something else to remember too, if you're in the area, go along Saint Laurent, close to Saint Viateur, believe it or not, and then you're going to find the Ubisoft headquarters. Yeah, they're actually based in Montreal. So if you played an Assassin's Creed game, there's a pretty good chance it was developed over here in Montreal too. So yeah, I think Assassin's Creed 2, Ezio Auditore di Firenze, nice Italian Renaissance assassin. He was created by Montreal people, so that's some kind of thing. The music scene is also pretty well known around there too. I think Arcade Fire was one of those artists that was formed around there. Bram Van 3000. I think even Leonard Cohen was talking about his fondness of the area as well too, so it is pretty known. There's also Cafe Olimpico that I would go to too. One of the few coffee shops that I went to that is actually open past 8 o'clock. Other times I've gone trying to get a coffee, think, how am I supposed to get it late at night? I had reasons why I was out late too. It's a pretty cozy area. It's actually pretty small. Like, you're thinking Montreal from the south, Bernard/Rosemount onto the north, and then to the east it's Saint Denis Street, and then to the west it's Hutchison Avenue. So yeah, it doesn't cover much, but it is pretty nice. Oh, hang on. I forgot to mention one other cool thing too for myself. The record convention. There was that one church that's like around Saint Dominic, Saint Laurent, Saint Joseph. That church over there, that they would have the record convention there too. So Old 33 Tours, Beatnik Records, they would always have their stuff there. And then people would come from Ontario, Toronto to sell their stuff there too. And I have fond memories of visiting that area to get some old stuff at the time. Back when it was easier to get, let's say, 5 old records for $20. Yeah. So very artsy, very musical, very quaint, cute. That's Mile End for you. Yes, people, I have beer in my trees, and I have beer growing from my yard. Hey, if I could dig up bricks, if I could dig up Unistone, if I can dig up closet doorknobs, I can dig up beer also. And I found a nice one that's a little, actually it's a pretty appropriate one. Grisette des Mines. And if you notice over here, well, there we go. You can see it now. It's a pickaxe. So yeah, a mining beer after I was digging with a pickaxe in my yard. And it's from Brassa du Monde. So I've had a few of their stuff before. It's an explosive one too. And luckily it's only 4%, so it's not going to be an abusive one. I will say that I am kind of a fan of grisettes now. In fact, I'm actually a fan of farmhouse ales or saisons too, just because some of them are light and I like the flavor in there. I kind of discovered them when I visited the Pit Caribou bar. That's not true, I discovered them in the past, but I really became familiar with them at the Pit Caribou bar that's over in the plateau. Yeah, that was a fun little trip. Oh, this thing is pretty heady. And I've already talked about it before, so I'm not gonna tell you about it again, but I'm gonna put a link on the top right corner for you to visit the Pit Caribou when I was telling you about what that farmhouse ale was and what it signifies. Delicious. It almost makes you think of Unibrew. If you've ever had a Unibrew beer, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. They're IPA, they're blondes, they're whites, they're saisons, they're everything. They always say it's beers on lees. Lees, it's like Lees. And it always feels like no matter what type of beer it is, there's always a taste that's consistent across the board, like almost conceptual continuity, if I was to use a term that Frank Zappa had used once. Easy way to distinguish it. Okay, let's see if I can get a little bit more in here. So then, if you're to go north along Saint Laurent and a little north of Rosemont Boulevard, or probably Van Horn, whichever street that is, you do get into Rosemont, La Petite Patrie, the other area I like to visit from time to time too. And if you've been following my channel for enough times, you probably would see that every time I started to wander, 9 times out of 10 I would always end up around the Rosemont area for a number of reasons. Some of it is my heritage, some of it is like recent discoveries, but let's just start off with the smallest part. Apparently there's La Petite Patrie, which kind of encompasses the area near Saint Laurent, close to, I want to say Saint Denis Street. I'm not going to get all into the geography, but bear with me for a second. That part where you go there, you're going to get to a small Latin community, which kind of explains why I did see Colombian dances once along some of the plaza. You're also going to get into Little Italy, which has no shortage of pizzerias, gelato places, and really like a lot of good Italian stuff and Italian cuisine. I loved it back then, but I'm appreciating a lot more, especially now that I am able to visit it and discover more from time to time. One of my best discoveries was Vices and Versa, so hats off to Dave in the comments section for introducing me to that years ago. Vices and Versa is along Saint Laurent, just like somewhere between Beaubien Street and Saint Zotique Street. It's a little microbrewer or a bar where you can get 40 Quebec beers and ciders on tap, which is astronomical considering that some places you could get like less than a dozen of them on tap, and you get a whole variety of styles too. If you like you're light, you're strong, you're blonde, you're black, they give you everything there. So check it out one of these days. And actually, sorry, got my direction mixed up. I'm gonna put a link to the top right corner to my visit to Little Italy, because I did visit that bar and I showed off the terrace in the back that kind of feels like a backyard, and it's amazing stuff. So that's one area there. But there's also Plaza Saint-Hubert. If you go around Bellechasse Street up until like Jean Talon Street, then it's basically all an outdoor promenade you're gonna find. Give you some protection from the rain, the snow, via the glass roof that is installed on the top, which I found kind of neat. There's a couple of nice shops there. I used to check out for music stores, video game stores. You know, naturally, because I was a gamer. Actually, no, I'm still a gamer. I just don't collect as much because that's another expensive hobby. But I did find a few cool spots there. I'd say Barabière Le Vestiaire, which translates to the locker. I guess it's like a beer locker, almost like you're storing beer in a locker, because you never know what you need for an emergency. That's kind of neat to do. There's also Chez Ernest, Comptoir de Curiosité. And no, if you're a Legend of Zelda fan, it's not the Curiosity Shop. It's a little bistro bar there that is kind of neat. And one thing I love is the vibe there. Like, you might find old Renaissance style plague doctor portraits there, whole bunch of looks like witchcraft kind of things, and a stage that's in the back. And one thing I love seeing too is that if you go on a Tuesday night, like at 8 o'clock, they give you free swing dance lessons too. Yeah, kind of crazy to think you have something like that in Rosemont. Oh yes, Nacho Libre is another place worth checking out if you're a video game nerd like me. Because if you look at that logo, it basically is the Nintendo logo, just redone to say Nacho Libre instead. The taps are made of refurbished NES zappers. They got an NES Mini there, a whole bunch of paraphernalia from Back to the Future, the Power Glove, and yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff. If you're my age, you grew up with that kind of stuff, so imagine it's like all your childhood is coming back as an adult. Hey, if the hippies can make the Volkswagen Beetle their luxury car, then why not?
Welcome to
there's still a bit of a flame in here because while the lighter cubes are starting to go out, I got one log that seems to be doing a little bit more fire than expected. So I'm gonna give this some time, let it preheat to 400 degrees. So that's Rosemont for me, for at least a portion of it, like Plaza Saint-Hubert, Little Italy. But there's another part of it that's a really big part of my life. Well, once again, in case you haven't been following me for a while, let me give you another recap. I was born in the Royal Vic, and I lived in Rosemont for my first year and a half of my life before I moved to the suburbs, so I do have a bit of familiar territory with that. I had a grandmother who lived around east of Beaubien, East Beaubien Street East, close to like Saint-Michel, which is considered the Ukrainian community of that area. So we used to visit her from time to time on weekends, or sometimes slept over too. She really had a fun time seeing us there. And I remember the Donald Duck Tavern that used to be there, the old Dunkin' Donuts. No, not that guy. Get him out of my head. That guy's gonna be haunt me for the rest of my life. I do remember the Dunkin' Donuts, minus that guy. The Dairy Queen that was on 9th Avenue in Beaubien, trips to Beaubien Park, having my first communion at the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary. That rings a bell too. Hard to believe I was 8 years old in that picture. What the hell happened to me? I was such a cute kid. Zhatinsky's Deli is another fun place to go to, especially to visit Angel Zhatinsky, who is the owner of that, is a friend of the family, and then she always used to comment like, I remember when you were like yay high and now look at you. So that's a big part of my childhood. Oh yeah, also Masson Street, like another outdoor promenade south of the Ukrainian district that we used to visit from time to time. Restaurants, dollar stores, my grandmother's bank was around there. And that was mostly my point of reference, mostly for the Ukrainian community. But then once I started to re-explore Montreal, during the pandemic, when I got comfortable going back into the city, that part of Rosemont was one of the areas that I wanted to revisit again for old time's sake. Knowing what I knew about microbrews, but it was also another reason. One of those other reasons was, as funny it was to go back there for family, I actually ended up dating someone who lived in that general area too. So she kind of knew a lot of the other hangouts I would talk about, like talking about 10th Avenue, talking about the Dairy Queen, even the Donald Duck Tavern. Luckily for her, she wasn't freaked out by the Great Antonio because she never had experiences with him, but that's like good for her. I would not wish the Great Antonio on anybody. So in some ways, it was all that helped me start to re-explore part of the city and maybe kind of explore Rosemont in a way that I haven't paid attention to in the past, given my current taste of coffee shops, bars, restaurants, like a lot of quaint ones. Something which is kind of true is that unlike the terraces in Montreal, like in downtown Montreal, a lot of the ones in that part of the island are very quaint. Those decks, terraces are very DIY, like something you would probably build yourself in your backyard, like, you know, taking a walk to a hardware store, getting your lumber there. They are kind of cute, and especially when you have those strings of garden lights around there, it gives a really nice ambience if you're there at night when it gets dark. Less so, I guess, during the peak summer season, but I guess towards the tail end of summer, when you still have terrace weather but it gets dark outside, that's probably when it feels the best. And that's kind of a big reason why I started to enjoy Rosemont once again. It's a big part of my childhood, but still something I'm grateful for. And that's a little bit more about the Rosemont that I wanted to talk to you about, and that gives you a bit of an idea of all the parts of Montreal that I kind of explored over time. Some of these places, had you asked me years ago, I would have passed by, thought it would have been kind of interesting, but then somehow went to grab a drink at the Old Port or in downtown just because that was part of my comfort zone. But as time went on, and I realized there was a lot more to see than I thought, I kind of jumped away from the downtown area to see what else is there beyond what I already know. And it let me kind of revisit some old memories and let me discover new places to drink, new types of food, new coffee shops I never would have thought about too. Outside of the whole goddamn Mad Clown parlor I like to bash on the channel. But who knows? There's going to be a lot more to discover too, and I've only really scratched the surface of the Montreal Island too. Like case in point, I haven't even talked much about my dad's side of the story, but I learned that he grew up around the Saint Henri or the Point St. Charles area, ended up in the St. Leonard eventually, and I have to cover some of those too because I do have memories of at least St. Leonard and Anjou. As for Saint Henri, well, that's also pretty close to the Saint-Ambroise Brewer with a very fabulous terrace right by the Lachine Canal. Hint, hint for a future episode. But you know what? You can't do it all at once. This summer has been a pretty nice summer to re-explore Montreal, kind of relive some old memories, pay tribute to my family, and also kind of revisit some old music that I had fond memories of growing up as a kid. And there's still going to be plenty of other stuff too to see from here on out. But until then, I'm going to thank you for watching this latest edition of the Wandering Yuki Cheese Cafe. So once again, if you like what you see, click that subscribe button below. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed my storytelling and my antics. And if you have any comments, like if you want to talk about the history, some of the areas of Montreal that you visited before, leave it in the comments section. And especially if you have an idea for a future episode, then by all means, shout it out loud to me. Till then, as I'm recording this, I'm saying happy rest of summer, but when this drops, we're already going to be in fall. Happy pumpkin spice latte, everyone.